So many of us, we've learned so much about God, and we believe things deeply about God, but we've really never figured out how to navigate what it means to have a relationship with God, to walk with God. And it all begins in this whole space of communication. And a lot of us talk at God when we're saying we're talking to God or talking with God. But it's hard enough. I mean, how many times have you prayed? That's what we call it. But really, in the end, you don't know if it worked. You have no idea if God was paying attention, if he responded, how he felt about the prayer, if he just got bored and tapped out. You have no idea how the conversation went, and much less if you try to evaluate hearing from God. It's mysterious enough to know if you're talking to God and it's working, but it's really difficult to know if you're actually hearing from God. And I think many times what happens is that even though we have faith, we just conclude, well, God doesn't really speak unless you've lost your mind. I mean, there's some people who go, oh, I heard God speak, and it makes me nervous when people think that God's an audible voice out there. That usually requires medication, not faith. But yet we believe there is a relationship with God that actually is formed in the midst of communication. And that's where we're finding ourselves in John chapter 10. Because we've been working our way through the Gospel of John, looking at our theme, 33 AD, the legend of Jesus. And in John chapter 10, Jesus begins talking about what it looks like to have an intimate, dynamic, authentic relationship with the creator of the universe. In John 10, beginning in verse 1, Jesus says this: "Very truly I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but comes in by some other way is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out. When he has brought out all of his own, he goes on ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize the stranger's voice." Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. Therefore, Jesus said to them, "Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." This is once again one of those places where Jesus speaks in metaphors. He speaks in parables. He speaks in allegories, and images. And in some places in the scriptures, it tells us that Jesus spoke in parables to make things clear. And some places it tells us that Jesus spoke in parables to keep things mysterious. And what you discover is that Jesus uses parables in some of the same ways that psychologists use ink blots. When they ask you, what do you see? It's not what's on the tablet that actually matters, but what you perceive is there that tells them who you really are. And Jesus has a way of unwrapping stories where he can see what's inside of the listener, and he can understand their motive, their intention. So when Jesus tells this story, it's both simple and complex, clear and confusing, depending on the motive of the listener. And of course, Jesus uses a metaphor of sheep and shepherds. And I don't know why, but sometimes people who grow up in the Christian faith think that the Bible has all the spiritual language. And so since Jesus talked about shepherds and sheep, we should always talk about shepherds and sheep, because we all live with sheep all around us, so we understand the full meaning of this metaphor. And it's so ironic that thousands of years later, the person on this platform is called a pastor because you're sheep, right? Is that the way it's supposed to play out? But if we should change the metaphors, if we're going to be more contextualized, like last night, there was a helicopter over our house, and he stayed for quite a long time, and there was another helicopter circling because there was a car chase. Everyone understands that. If I said, and the kingdom of God is like a helicopter hovering over your house while police cars are chasing a singular car, Some of you go, oh, I remember when that happened to me. And some of you were the person driving the car. I don't know your backstory, but you need to realize that Jesus was using a metaphor that was real in that time. And so they knew what it was like to have sheep. They knew the role of shepherds. That was an occupation that was common. And so Jesus uses this very common space to talk about an uncommon reality. To let them know that a relationship with God is actually not about knowledge. It is voice activated. It's not information activated. Jesus begins by saying, very truly I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but by some other way is a thief and a robber. So he's already giving us this basic contrast. There's a shepherd that actually protects the sheep, and then there are strangers who are thieves who want to destroy the sheep. And this scenario is happening at the same time to the same people. And before we dive into that part of it more deeply, I want you to see, because the one who entered by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. And then he describes the sheep. He says that the gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out. When he has brought out all of his own, he goes on ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. So Jesus actually begins by saying, I want you to understand something, that human beings are designed to hear God. This isn't Jesus explaining how sheep work. This isn't Jesus explaining how the relationship between shepherds and sheep work. What he's actually trying to help us see is how humans are designed in relationship to their Creator. And what he wants you to understand before we can go any further, you need to realize that you are designed to hear God. It doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean it's simple. It means it's true. And you are designed for this, and you may live beneath your design, but it doesn't change your design. And even if you do not believe in God, you are still designed to hear God, which can be so confusing when you hear something that isn't there. It's part of the reason a lot of us go through an immense amount of mental complexity, chaos, and breakdown. Because human beings are designed for such an elevated level of communication that when we're living beneath that level of communication, our minds go crazy and go into chaos.